the lecture on deviance, and as you can see right there off the bat, it's deviance, which basically tells you that any kind of behavior that society doesn't see as being part of what is acceptable is considered deviant. Deviance is not necessarily criminal. So a lot of people who say deviants are criminals or criminals are deviant, it's not really a vice versa thing. And so not all deviants are criminals, and not all deviance is a crime. Okay, so moving on. Deviance is a violation of society's norms. Societies have rules. All societies have rules and expectations and things that happen. And from a very large scale on a macro level to a micro level, like small societies, like let's say in schools, there are just certain norms and rules that are expected. Some rules that if you violate them will get you suspended, while other rules will just get you a stern look from a teacher or an administrator. Very much like you would get from your parents. It's kind of burping in public as a 15 or 20-year-old might get your parents looking at you going like, for real, kid? Whereas a 5-year-old, parents will kind of give them that stern look, like that's not kind of the behavior we expect here in public, and that kind of thing. So that's the expectation and how it's usually dealt with. And what I kind of given you here is the idea of positive or negative sanctions. Positive sanctions are a kind of thing where if somebody does something within the norms, we generally give them a ribbon or a certificate or a round of applause, a parade, depending on how awesome it was. And then on the flip side, negative sanctions usually constructed, and you see here, constructed expressions of disapproval. And really what that is kind of can go anywhere from, again, a stern look from a parent like, I'm so disappointed, to the you're suspended, to the you're going to jail. And it kind of ranges anywhere in there. Usually the strength of the sanction is kind of correlated to, or is almost equal to, the violation, right? So I mean, very rarely will a murderer ever have someone look at him and go, I'm so disappointed, right? That's the kind of thing where it's such an extreme deviance that there's an extreme punishment or negative sanction that goes with it. Don't want that. So deviance is relative, and that's very important to note, because no matter where you are in the world, at some point you could potentially be deviant. So then the question becomes, so what causes us to brand one group of people deviant in one place, and in another place they're perfectly normal and acceptable and acting just like anybody else? And so I'm going to give you a few of the relative ideas connected to deviance, and the one is location. There are certain places, location. I'm not talking about countries now, or cultures. That's a different kind of location. In this case, location is usually the kind of idea where, talking loudly in church service, that would be deviant. Talking loudly at a party is just normal, right? It's kind of expected. The same idea with, I'm a serial killer. I'm not a serial killer, but let's say I was a serial killer and, I kill 35 people. Obviously, if I get caught, when I get caught, I'm going to face extreme punishment. However, some guy with a gun goes out and shoots 25 people who are branded enemies from another country during war. Suddenly this person is given a parade and a medal, and wow, you're such a hero. How is that even possible? That, the act is exactly the same. It is murder in the truest sense of the word, whether you're doing it as a soldier or as a killer, or as a murderer. You're still killing, you're taking another life, before its natural end. And therefore, society could kind of turn around and say, yeah, but that guy did it on his own, while this one was sanctioned by society, right? So society said, go kill, right? And the person said, okay. And that's really what, the relativism is of it all. Age also is a very interesting part of what is allowed to be deviant. You let kids get away with things that adults generally cannot. My 5-year-old son sitting on the front porch with a stick in his hand, pretending that it's a rifle, going pew, 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 right? It's perfectly normal. He's a little kid. He's playing soldier or whatever he's doing. Me sitting on my front porch holding a stick and pretending that it's a gun, that people as they go by and going pew, 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 and you're all envisioning it and probably laughing at it. But I mean, envision how that would look, right? people would obviously start to wonder what's wrong with me. You know, when a little kid does it, like, oh, that's so cute. When an adult does it, you're like, oh man, that guy's a potential criminal. So let me give you a different example. My 5-year-old daughter loves to skip. She's a skipper. I'm not talking about skipping on the rope. She likes to skip, like as in walking and skipping and hopping and jumping. And so she says to me as we were going through the store the other day, the supermarket, she's like, Daddy, why don't you skip with me? And so I, as a daddy, have to skip with my 5-year-old daughter because, darn it, she asked me to skip with her. So there I was, skipping along with my daughter. Now, envision this for just one moment. Like a grown man and a little girl skipping through the supermarket together, and she's giggling hysterically. And I'm kind of having a good time with her because, you know, it's my 5-year-old daughter and she wants me to skip, so I did. People watching were actually kind of like, oh, that's kind of cute, right? You know, now picture me just going through the supermarket on my own, skipping. And then people would be like, right, there's something, you know, wrong with this dude. So you see, age will allow deviance to a certain point, and yet other points, you know, somebody would, like security would come like, stop it, sir, you're skipping, you know. But security never came out to say, stop it, sir, and little girl skipping through, a father, daughter having fun, you know. So it's quite interesting how we as a society have an expectation for ages. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of the Neo-Citron here. Just hold on. Marvelous. Okay. Social status. Famous actors and actresses and celebrities can get away with pretty much anything, right? They're allowed to do that because they're a celebrity, and well, you know, they're rich and they're famous and they're a great actor or a great singer. They're probably under a lot of stress, so you know, they drove their car into a tree, and that's okay. You know, it happens. You know, anyone else doing it who's not famous drives their car into a tree, and there are lawsuits abound. Now, that's not to say that celebrities get away with everything, but you all know and you've seen where celebrities can pretty much get away with a lot more than the average person. The next one you see here is individual societies, and the example I give here is quite true. It happened to me where I was traveling. I'm not going to tell you what country, but just note that I was going through a market, and there was a price there, and I looked at one of the souvenirs. I wasn't going to buy it, so I kind of walked away, and then the shopkeeper kind of came out and said, you know, do you want this one? I'm like, no, I'm good. I was just like, and he's like, well, why not? And I go, it's too expensive, right? Just kind of walked away. And he was like, well, let's barter. He was like, well, you know, what are you going to give me? And I was like, no, I'm not interested, thank you. And he actually was quite upset. He was yelling at me. Now, you know, I do, whatever. What am I going to do? So I just kind of like kept walking. I didn't really care. But, you know, it's an expectation that if I'm going to go there, you know, I should barter for a better price, or I could negotiate. Now you try going to Costco, you know, and say, hey, I see you got the Q-tips there, the 3 for $6, you know, I'll take another couple off your hands and give them to me half price. The cashier's going to look at you and go, what? Right? You're like, yeah, let's make a deal here. I'll give you cash, right? And it's kind of strange that we don't necessarily do that here, and it's not an expectation that we would do that here. But in other parts of the world, if you don't, then you're kind of out of the norm. Here you see the two videos here, and I want you to have a look at. I've got the one video preloaded here. It's the mankind. Anyway, just quickly humor me here on this one video, and just see, like, there's two scenarios in this just one video alone, right? And look at the deviance and see if you can spot it. Obviously you can, but here it is.
What?
Too fucking blood.
Get your hand off me.
Come here.
What?
Where were you?
I'm not talking to you about this. I'm not talking to you. Get your hand off me.
Who was there?
Get your hand off me.
Who was there? Tell me who was there.
People are looking at us. People are looking at us. Will you get your hand off me? Stop. People are looking at us. What's wrong with you?
Honestly, we're fine.
No, that's I'm grand, thanks. Okay, because someone will call the police if you carry on doing that to someone.
Okay.
'Cause if I don't, someone else will.
Okay.
Okay.
It's perfectly fine.
You don't have to put up with that, Helen. Okay. Either way, thank you.
My office is there. You're definitely right.
Yeah, I am.
Just come knock.
I'm grand, thanks. What do I do what? Do you ever listen to me?
Chrissy, stop that. You're crazy,
Fucking
man.
manic. I've been talking at you for the last 10 minutes and you haven't listened. You haven't gotten into fucking what I've been saying to you. But you're fucking not even listening to me, that's what. Why do I push you like that? Because you won't fucking respond to me and you won't listen to me. You think you're fucking all manly.
I wasn't.
No, you can't be. No, you can't be. Don't try and fucking walk away. Stop. Listen to me when I'm talking. Don't try and fucking walk away from me. Stop it. What the fucking bullshit? What the fucking bullshit?
What the fuck is wrong with you?
What the fuck is wrong with me? There's nothing. Don't give me that shit, okay? Pathetic. You're so fucking pathetic.
So you saw there, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Well, the woman was threatened. She looked like she was being abused. Everyone jumped in, we're going to call the police, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And they were like fully ready to rescue her. Flip it to the other way, and suddenly, let me just go back. When the guy is abusive to the woman, everyone's jumping in, and he is purely deviant. Like, he is beyond the norms of what's an expectation in our society or in that society. And then fast forward or flip it over to where the female is now being violent and abusive towards the male, and people are like, he's getting beaten, right? And it's almost funny how when we see the deviance, and it is deviant, right? Because it's still abuse, and we do say abuse is abuse regardless, right? It's deviant, and yet, when it's happening to a man, and it's a woman who's the one that's clearly deviant, it almost seems like he's the deviant because he's not standing up and being a man. And so, the question is like, and you can watch this. I'm going to share this presentation on Google Docs with you, but you can see it's very, very interesting how, as a society, we see the exact same act, and it's almost dependent on who it is and why it's happening, and people are very, very quick to either judge or laugh. And you saw they were literally positively sanctioning that woman's abuse of the man, right? And even though it was happening almost the exact same dialogue, changing the characters really, really changed our impressions, or the people's impressions of it. Symbolic interactionism, then I'm going to go back again and kind of bring this to the stuff that we've already covered. But it's very, very true that society is a product of how we behave as individuals in small situations, right? And if you look at these small situations, the great changes that take place in society are often because of these small situations that eventually become larger and larger. And if you're not really sure what I mean, consider for a moment that domestic violence, or the violence between men or men towards women, was at some point in our history acceptable. And then eventually it became unacceptable. Then the question becomes, well, did it happen? Yes. Did people know about it? Yes. Did people do anything about it? No. So then what happened? What was it about these interactions that eventually kind of turned it? And again, this is more of a rhetorical question. I'm not expecting any of you to answer me because, first of all, this is a lecture, and second, it's a video. But you kind of have to consider the history of it, and you have to consider the frequency of it, so how often it happened. And once you start to see, when it started, how it started, what happened, how it happened, who it happened to, and then eventually how did it spiral into where people went, no, that's wrong, versus before where it was kind of like, well, what did she do to deserve it, right? And then let's kind of turn it over to the other and look at something, for example, as interesting as spanking. Now, spanking children is acceptable, and I'm kind of putting that as a question. In some parts of the world, yes. In some parts of the world, no. in Canada, is it acceptable? And again, I'm not expecting an answer, but I can tell you that at some point there was a law passed, and the government kind of said, yes, we're going to make spanking illegal, and everyone went, whoa, that's one you shouldn't probably maybe I don't think that's going to be a good one. And there are countless reasons as to why the government decided we're going to not make this happen. One of them being the fact that they said there's no way we would be able to enforce it all the time. And second of all, the idea that telling parents how to parent their children becomes an issue. Now, that's not to say that abuse or child abuse is okay. Far from it. Child abuse is still, a crime, and it is still deviant. However, where do you draw the line? And that's where I'm kind of going with this idea of symbolic interactionism, because the idea is that how do we differentiate between what is in fact abuse and what is in fact just spanking? And all of you out there, all my e-peeps who are listening to this lecture, at some point you either have encountered a spank, or you haven't, and you can say from your own parents you were spanked or you weren't. But what's interesting is that it eventually becomes perpetuated, because if you were spanked as a child, statistics show that chances are you'll probably spank your children and you won't see anything wrong with it. If you weren't spanked as a child, you probably won't spank your children and you see something wrong with it. But that's very, very difficult to enforce and to consider deviance, because in some places it is, in some places it isn't. And at what point can you say to someone in their own home how they should behave or how they should raise their children? And it really becomes very, very sticky. So back to this, deviance is a learned behavior. I've kind of mentioned this before, and I kind of drew the example of you were spanked or not. And then you have the deviant subcultures, right? So I'm generally going to associate with parents who parent like me, and I'm probably going to avoid parents who don't parent like me. And this is just simply a culture or a subculture within our general Canadian culture. That's not to say we have don't spank your kids anonymous, that we have a club and we meet every Tuesday, but that's the associations that we have, and that's a very symbolic interactionist thing. But think of it on a different level. If my kids are into hockey, I generally hang out with hockey parents. And that's the thing. A guy by the name of William Reckless, which I think is just like a great name, Reckless, cool. Anyway, he's got this idea of what's known as control theory. And as you see here, people have two control systems to keep them from acting outside society's norm, inner and outer controls, right? The inner controls are that thing that says, maybe I shouldn't, and the outer controls are the people who you associate with. Interestingly enough, if you associate with people who are like you, they generally won't be the ones controlling you, because they probably think and act the way you do. And that's very much a social thing. We think, we associate, we hang out. Our friends are generally very much like us, and very few of our friends are quite our opposites. Herschel's theory talks about control theory, and he says that there are 4 factors associated with control theory. One is that they make people more or less likely to commit deviance. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'll tell you what I mean by that. Society can control you, but some people have a streak where they'll be like, you know what, I'm just not going to do what they expect me to do. Right? So control can actually push people to deviance. They can actually say, you know what, I'm going to be different, and I'm not going to follow your rules, and I'm going to be deviant. Now, many of you, because you're at the age group that you are in a very deviant state, and many of you are in a rebellious state, and rebellion generally comes at this age of your lives. Not to say that you all are, but some people are. And this is a time where people start to kind of exert or assert their deviance and saying, I'm just not going to do what you want me to do, mom and dad, or teacher, or principal, or coach, right? And they kind of commit deviance because of the control. It's kind of trying to fight it, fight the power. But yeah, that's the 4 factors of control theory. And you see them here: attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. And I'll expand on these in the next slide here, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Oh wait, I didn't actually put them down here. My bad. Let me go back and quickly explain what they are. So, what are the things that will kind of force you to kind of follow along with the rules? Attachment. So how close and how how invested are you in the relationship with the people that you're associating with? So how attached are you? You're less likely to be deviant for people that you are so close to, and you'll be more likely to be deviant with people that you're not very close to. That's the idea of commitment as well. Involvement is another one, in the sense that so if I have a group of friends, for example, and in my group of friends, I really, really want to belong to this group, and I really, really want to be a part of this group, I will, in some ways, conform to their norms and rules. And if those norms and rules are deviant, I want to belong, and so I will. I will do my best to be deviant to belong, even though it's kind of messed up if you think about it. I will be deviant so that I can belong to a society. And it's weird, but I will be deviant of society's greater norms to belong to a smaller sub-society or subculture, so that which is deviant, and I want to be part of that. And that's the idea of belief there you see at the end. Try to think also of cults, and people will fully and wholeheartedly put themselves into a cult, and you see there's attachment and commitment and involvement and belief, and there's a great deal of that, and even though the cult may be a deviant subculture, people will often join in, and they really want to belong. And that subculture, those cults, actually do control you with their own sense of what's right and what's wrong and what's deviance and their social controls. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, labeling theory, deviant is what society labels as deviant. Interestingly enough, what that really boils down to is you want to be very careful in labeling someone as a deviant, because some people will actually try to live up to that. Oh, I'm a deviant, am I? Cool, let me show you how deviant I can be. So it's very, very, sometimes it's almost like you don't really want to label it, you just want to let it slide, and hopefully it'll kind of go away. Another one is primary deviance, right, which is kind of like, you kind of did it once and you weren't really cool with it, so you're not going to do it again. You kind of strayed from the path. And then there's secondary deviance, which is the continued deviance, and usually that comes from people's reaction. So if you do something deviant and people go, oh yeah, whatever, right, then you're like, oh cool, they really weren't as upset as I thought they were going to be, I'm going to do more, right? That's one way that primary and secondary deviance works, where people will kind of get into things that are not necessarily norms or socially acceptable, but they often will repeat it, sometimes just to get a rise out of people, right? So it's like, no, look at me, I'm deviant, right? So I'm going to continue to be deviant. Somebody acknowledge my deviance, right? Some people will go on primary, again, get a slap on the wrist and get right back on the straight and narrow. Other people will get away with it and continue to get away with it because they love the excitement of getting away with it. And others do it just because they want other people, and I'm talking about secondary deviance, which is the follow-up, the continued deviance. And that's usually because they want, like, hey, look at me, I'm deviant, somebody, anybody, punish me, right? And that's the long and the short of that. Structural functionalism is very interesting because it looks at the bigger issue, the bigger problems in society. It's not so much the sense that the odd person goes and does something strange and whole society gets really upset. It looks at the larger picture and what is the real cause of this deviance. Deviance is normal. I mean, everyone at some point in their lives, and if you haven't been already, you will be deviant to the true norms of this society, and that's perfectly normal. The deviance is a normal part of society. And whether you continue to be deviant or you come back is up to you, or up to different factors. But the truth is that deviance is an important part of society. Without deviance, we wouldn't have change, we wouldn't have growth, we wouldn't have a development. And that's where you see here at the bottom, So Emil Durkheim, one of the fathers of sociology, came up with the idea of why deviance is important. First of all, it reminds us of what's good. So if we don't see the bad, we won't remember all the good stuff about society. So, that one bad person, we can all look back and go, yeah, that bad guy, but the rest of us are good, right? Which is the clarification of what's right and wrong, right? And then the third one says the unification of others in society. And so the idea is that everyone has a group. Everyone belongs to a group. Everyone finds groups to belong to. And some may be mildly deviant, but you have to belong to a group. So even if it's a deviant group, so be it, right? That we have a necessary need. We have a need to belong to a group. And again, the last one which I was talking about is the idea of social change. The idea that what once was deviant is now acceptable because people continue to be deviant, because they felt a conviction in the deviance and saying, well, no, society, even though you're the large majority and those are your rules, you're wrong. You are so wrong in your beliefs. Like I mentioned to you a couple slides back about at what point did somebody say abusing women was not okay? Well, somebody had to, and it brought about social change. We're getting there, I promise. And I'm going to take another Neocitrin sip here. All right, so structural functionalism also, again, remember, considering the bigger picture, a guy by the name of Robert Merton came along with the idea of strain theory. And it says here that when people are prevented from achieving culturally approved goals through institutionalized means, they experience strain, which leads to deviance. So what do all these lovely words mean? Well, fundamentally what he's saying is sometimes people just can't follow along with the rules of society. They can't. They are prevented for whatever their reasons are. And they could be economic, they could be socioeconomic, they could be physical, they could be whatever, right? Well, the strain that they feel for not being able to fulfill these goals or these approved goals will make them feel deviant. And so what ends up happening is that there are certain ways that you deal with it. One, you try really, really hard to conform. You do. And you try to fit in. You work extra hard. Other people are the innovators, right? And these are the people who will try hard to change things to kind of fit, right? Then you have the ritualists, and the ritualists are the ones who say, I'm just going to follow the path, and I'm going to do exactly what everyone else does, and hopefully that'll work really, really well for me. And those people are, again, you could come up with examples in your head. I'm running this lecture way too long, so I'm going to try to blow through this as fast as possible. The retreaters are the ones who kind of, as the word says, kind of hide within themselves. And those are the people who, when society says no, they're the ones who kind of like turtles immediately regress into their shells or go into their shells and just do their best to kind of lay low. And if I don't do anything, then I promise I won't be deviant ever again. And the rebels, the people who say, oh, is that how we're going to play society? Well, let me take you on, right? And they're the loud and proud, and they can go anywhere from the extreme rebels to the people who just kind of work within society. And again, the idea is that society has marginalized these people. It has made it difficult for these people to fit in. And so these people will have different ways of responding to this difficulty in fitting in. And again, that's a very normal part of society. We've all experienced it at some point or another. And how we deal with it is how individually others who are like us deal with it, but then also how other people bring about change. The conflict theory is very interesting because it kind of ties into something I mentioned before. If we don't have any kind of deviance or rebellion, we will not have social change. And Karl Marx was the guy who came up with this idea. And feel free to read on with this, but I'm going to keep going through. But the long and the short of it is that you need some kind of struggle. You need people as deviants to kind of say, no, society, you're so wrong, and we're going to bring about change because you don't, even though you're the majority, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay, here's the extreme deviance, and I've alluded to it several times. Crime. Crime is, in fact, true deviance, and anyone who breaks the law is deviant and a criminal. Now, there are types of crimes. So there are crimes against the person, the physical crimes, crimes against property and victimless crimes. So crimes against a person could be anything from hitting somebody or killing somebody or doing something physically to another person. There are crimes against property, that's stealing things, destroying things, taking things and, messing them up and giving them back, whatever the crimes against property may be. And then the victimless crimes. Now, the victimless crimes are very interesting because victimless crimes, every crime has a victim theoretically, but victimless crimes are the ones where somebody embezzles money or somebody doesn't pay their taxes. Well, I guess the victim in the case of somebody not paying their taxes would be the government, right? Because the government's not getting its money, but it's, no one's actually getting hurt per se. So that would be considered a victimless crime. And again, how society sees these crimes is usually how it reacts in its punishments. Age, gender, social class, race, and ethnicity are categories that sociologists create criminal profiles. So, again, each of these generally has an age or a gender or social class that are associated, or age and gender in certain crimes, social class and gender in other crimes, and so forth and so forth. So it's kind of like almost like a tic-tac-toe board where you can literally run an X and Y axis of the crimes versus the other ones, and then you can kind of pinpoint the areas in a scattered plot graph. Facts, again, read through these by all means. And race, ethnicity, social class. There's actually really, really awesome documentary on Netflix. If you have Netflix, you watch it. It's called 13th, and it's super crazy intense about how the prison system in the United States is all messed up. And I mean, most of us outside can see that, and quite a few Americans can see that for that matter. But this documentary does a really good job of giving you a bit of a historical background at the same time, also specifically talking about why, in this case, race and ethnicity is such an essential part of how the American system works. And what I'm saying is an essential part is that, and you'll watch the documentary. It's pretty good at explaining this. But basically, why is it that the majority of the prison population is African American in the United States? And it asks the question, and it kind of comes up with answers and explains why it is. Really good. If you have a chance, watch it. So there is the last one. Again, examples of deviance, and what these are like those old public service announcements. Some of them, girls in the 50s, here's how you're supposed to behave. Very black and white movie, very proper. You got the narrator and so forth and so forth. Other things like anti-drugs and so forth. These are all things that come out. There was one. I don't know if you can find it, but you can probably check it out on YouTube. This one about. Oh wait, there it is. It's called Boys Beware now. Yeah. So that's the one about. Be careful, because if you ever go hitchhiking, you may be picked up by a homosexual, and homosexuals are sick in the head, and boys, don't ever get into a car with a homosexual, right? And this was a thing. This was put out into the world, and people watched this and went, "This is true. Be careful, Jimmy. Don't get into a car with a homosexual." And it's almost like a public service announcement, like these people are criminals, when in fact they weren't, and they still aren't. But it's quite strange how society expressed at that point in history that this was very, very much a deviant behavior. And then today we look at it and go, for real? Like, are you kidding me? And probably many of these that you watch, if you watch them. And I would encourage you to. But if you watch them, you kind of look and you kind of chuckle to yourself and go, "You got to be kidding me, right? Like, this was actually a thing. People were worried about it." So that's it. I'm at the end of my rope and halfway through my neocitrin because I've been talking a lot. And I'm going to leave it here. The rest of the stuff you'll kind of follow along. But just keep reading, because I can't keep talking. My throat's getting too dry. But yeah.